Hello, the internet! It is Saturday, the 1st of June, 2024, and welcome back to the channel. This forms part 2 of a 2-part stream series, I suppose, if you like. It could be longer. It's up to you to make it longer. My stories conclude with this stream. But what we're doing here, or what we want to do here, as a continuation of what we did here about 4 weeks ago, I want to talk about the stories in COVID times. I want to specifically talk about my story, or my second story. I want to be very clear about this, though, before we get into it. The point of this stream is not to have a argument or a discussion or a conversation about the merits of COVID and about what they did and what they didn't do. That's not what we're here for. I don't really care if you believed or if you didn't, or if you do or if you don't. I don't care if you're innocent, if you're guilty. I don't care if you're jabbed, if you're not. We're not here to discuss any of that. What we're here to discuss is remembering factually what happened for the sake of preserving it. Because I know as I get older, I forget things. And, well, if it's on a live stream, it can't be forgotten and it can't be reinterpreted because the story is told as it happened, and therefore it's documented in the chronicles of the ages, let's just say. So I want to tell my story. Selfishly, I want to get it out there so that it sticks out there, and then I'd like to throw it open to anybody else, like I did last time on part 1. If you have a story that you wanted to add, we can either do another stream where you call in, but the point of it is you have to be able to put your face to the story. I don't want to just see chat comments popping off about they did this and they did that. I want you to be able to come on and tell the story. So, with that in mind, I will just deliver my story, and then if there's conversation in the chat, I see Dugski, I see John, I see David, good morning all. If there is conversation in the chat, I'll then take a pause to go back and reread the chat, but I am going to just talking head this off so that I can get it done. And yeah, so just bear in mind that I might not engage with you if you are making comments. I'll often glance over there, and if I do see something, it might trigger my, it might change my... It might ruin my train of thought. So the second story I've got involves New Zealand. Now, long-term viewers of my content will know that I spent... Dude, I keep getting it wrong. It wasn't last year. It was now the year before last. It's 2 years ago. It's 2 winters ago. I went over to New Zealand to live, specifically in Queenstown, the South Island. I had lived there in the year 2000 for a year, and I always wanted to go back. And so I just did it. I just decided, you know what? I'm doing it. And so I went over there it was about 7 months in totes. Now, that was 2022. Yeah, 2022. It's 2024 now. So it wasn't last winter. It wasn't the winter we're in now or about to enter. It wasn't the one before. It wasn't the one before that. Yes, it was. Fuck. I'm so bad with dates. It was 2 years ago. So anyway, it was the end of COVID or nearing the end of COVID. But there were still restrictions in place, still different restrictions per country. So I was going from Australia, if those that don't know, I'm on the east coast of Australia, Sydney, and I was going to the South Island of New Zealand. So 2 separate sets of laws, I suppose, all based around what we were hearing from the health authorities, and then each country could decide what they wanted to implement. So for me, there's 2 parts to this story, and the first part is getting to New Zealand, and then the second part is in New Zealand. So in the getting to New Zealand part, there was requirements that I needed to fulfill to leave my place of residence. And then there was requirements that I needed to fulfill to enter the next country. So to leave Australia, I needed to meet criteria, and then to enter New Zealand, I also needed to meet criteria. And I want to hone in on, or I want to highlight what those criteria were. And it also needs to be mentioned that typically or normally, and during COVID, this was the case, there are direct flights from Sydney to Queenstown, New Zealand. which is the location. So there are direct flights. However, during COVID, they jacked these prices up like astronomically. I think the cheapest flight that I could see direct from Sydney to Queenstown was close to $3,000. Now, just for comparison's sake, that fare should be, a cheap one would be like $280, $270. Then an expensive one would be like maybe $500. But these were like nearly $3,000 to do that same trip. And the only reason they were jacked up is because many airlines weren't doing that flight, whereas before there were multiple airlines that would cover that leg. But because of the lack of the restrictions on airlines putting a certain amount of people in planes and whatnot, so a lot of airlines were like, we're not doing that. So I think it was Air New Zealand and Qantas that actually had the direct flight. Now, moving to New Zealand for winter is quite a costly thing to do. It's the setup and the shifting, and I had to get a job and do all that stuff. It already sapped my disposable income, so I didn't have $3,000 to be able to afford a direct flight. So instead, what I had to do to get the airfare back down to what would be considered normal, I had to go from Sydney, Brisbane. So that's about an hour and a half north of Sydney. So I had to go Sydney, Brisbane, Brisbane, Wellington, Wellington, Queenstown. And that would make that normally around about a 7-hour trip. It should be about a 2-hour one-way trip. But going Sydney, Brisbane, Brisbane, Wellington, Wellington, Queenstown makes it about a 7-hour trip. Of course, the Wellington, Queenstown trip was not the same day, so they don't schedule them like that. So it actually became an overnight trip. So that was a 24-hour flight to go just across the ditch to New Zealand. And so the story I'm going to tell involves me having to get myself tested to leave this area, this locale, before I could board my flight to Brisbane, which is in another state of Australia, so New South Wales to Queensland. So I had to satisfy the exit requirements from New South. Then I had to satisfy the entry requirements into Queensland, and that meant proving that I had the vaccine, that I had 2 jabs of the vaccine, and that I had a negative COVID test from my town before I left, which I did. I had all those things. 2 jabs of AstraZeneca beforehand, plus the test upon departure from here. Now, when I got to Brisbane, there's obviously a connecting flight from Brisbane to Wellington that I needed to catch. So I'm there in Brisbane Airport and I've done everything correct, and I go to line up for this exit flight, or I go to take my bags through their security, because this wasn't it wasn't like you check your bags in at Sydney and they wind up in Queenstown. No, you got to check them each time, right? It's all kinds of wrong at this point. So I go to check my bags again in Brisbane, and that's when Brisbane pop up with their own little requirement, and they say to exit Brisbane, you need another COVID test. Now, this is why I'm documenting this, because this is a bit outrageous, right? I've already done the exit test from Sydney. I think it was 2 days before I had to leave this town, had to get the exit test. So now I'm in another city, in a different jurisdiction, a different state of Australia, and they say, you need to satisfy our exit requirements. And that includes another test, and it has to take place here in the airport, and further to that, you've got to pay for it. So all through COVID in Australia, testing was free. From what I understood, testing was free. You could go and get a test at any little town you wanted, just pull up to a mobile testing unit. They'd shove that thing up your nose and off you go. For some reason, this test, they're like, nope. If you are trying to leave Brisbane on a flight, you need a test here at the airport. Like, what are you talking about? Look at my results here. Like, what, how, like, and they're like, yeah, but you could have got it on the flight from Sydney. You could have got it when you arrived here in Brisbane. I'm like, yeah, I could have, but my flight's leaving. Like, what am I going to do? And they're like, how long have you got? And I'm like, well, okay, there's about an hour and a half. And they're like, you can get a rapid test right now in the airport. It'll cost you $75. Go downstairs, go into this little alleyway, go into this little room and get it done, and tell them that you're on an outgoing flight. And I'm like, fucking seriously? Is that where we're at right now? You guys are jacking the price up, and you're doing this just because? Like, you don't need this. Like, I've already satisfied the outgoing requirements, but now I've got to satisfy additional outgoing. All right, well, I don't want to mess up my chances to get this thing going in New Zealand, so I'll pay for the $75 jab. Not jab. I'll pay for the $75 rat test. So I go down there and do it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because that's the only test that they managed to turn around virtually on the spot. So I got my test and I went back upstairs and I got myself a hot dog or something, and then by the time I was sitting down, it came through on my phone. Your test results are, surprise, surprise, negative. You're not guilty. I always use those terms, guilty and not guilty. I was innocent. I knew I was innocent. So that's what the results said. So I show them to the thing, and they're like, okay, you can now board your flight to New Zealand. So I did that. So I went from Brisbane to Wellington. Now, of course, when you arrive in Wellington, you're now dealing with New Zealand. And New Zealand obviously have their own requirements, and those requirements were 2 jabs and proof of negativity, proof of innocence. And so I had 2 proofs of innocence, one from Sydney, one from the town I'm in, one from Brisbane, and I had 2 jabs. So I was like, done, 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 I'm good. And so one thing I will note that, and I think I brought this up on the other stream, the flight was interesting because there was still the separation requirements, so you couldn't sit next to somebody on a plane. So there was like passenger, vacant seat, passenger, and likewise if there was a 4 in these flights, there's not 4, there's just 3. Window seat, passenger, vacancy, aisle seat, passenger, and that was like yeah, there's got to be a gap. But then what I noted was really funny or interesting, or if you like, comical. The person in front of me is right there. They're not in a vacant seat, so I'm literally here and I'm breathing on this person's back of their head, yet I can't have a person there, which, to be fair, more than not, you're facing that way on a plane. You're not sort of, unless you're yapping with someone next to you, you're not really facing that way. You're pretty much I'm pretty much breathing all over this dude's neck, right? Of course, the requirements still at that point were to have a mask on during the flight, which is fine. We're not here to argue the merits of whatever the mask does and doesn't do, but you wear the mask until they say, ding, 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 here comes the in-flight service, folks. You can take your masks off. Oh, so now I can just take that off and just breathe willy-nilly? Okay, cool, no worries. And I'm breathing all over the dude in front. And all I'm doing is saying, historically, even if you're for it, you can't not find that interesting, right? It's comical. It's comical. Isn't it? Isn't it comical that is a thing? It's okay to take it off if they're giving you food. The virus doesn't know that, right? The virus just comes out willing. Anyway, so we get to New Zealand, we arrive in Wellington, and I satisfy all their requirements. And then, of course, and this is a bit of a sidestep here, but there's the requirements, or there's the wait period between my outgoing flight from Wellington to Queenstown, which I told you is an overnight stay. Now, did you know this little side spiral? If you have a connecting flight from an international airport and it's overnight, like it's over... Hang on. If the international flight that you're connecting with, go back. If you have a connecting flight from an international airport and you've arrived from international, not like your domestic flight in a domestic terminal trying to do another domestic. If you have an international, if you've got a ticket from another country and your connecting flight is the next day, legally you can remain in the airport until that flight arrives. Now, that's normally not a problem with an international airport. They're usually 24/7. Wellington Airport, being a small town in New Zealand, I guess, small city, it does close between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. So there's a 2-hour period where the airport is closed. And I did get into a conversation with a security guard about the merits of staying in the airport. And I proved that there's an international treaty or agreement with airports that as long as the passenger has an international flight and they're here and they've arrived and the domestic or the connecting flight isn't whatever, you can stay. So I just slept on the floor at the airport. But that's a side story. So anyway, so that's the flight. Then I obviously get my boarding flight from my connecting flight from Wellington to Queenstown. And because you're already in New Zealand, thankfully it wasn't like Australia where you go across a border and then you got to do another test and everything. So once you arrived in Queenstown, they give you you got to show your proofs and everything, and then they give you a whole bunch of rat tests that you've got to then satisfy over. I think it was the course of 2 weeks. You've got to do upon arrival at your final destination, so your residence or wherever you're staying. So you need to know that, by the way. You can't just rock up willy-nilly and say, I'm going to go somewhere. You've got to tell them where you're going. That's origin tracing, or what was the terminology? Contact tracing. So you got to know where you're going. So I knew my address already because I had already sorted all that shit out. So I gave them my address. And then upon arrival in Queenstown at Huff Street, I have to then test immediately and then provide the results through a QR code. And then you got to do it again after 3 days, I think, and then again after 7 days. Now, that's not too bad, right? That's just double checking, I guess, just complete idiot proofing the system. So I did all that, and of course I tested negative. So that's kind of like part one of the story, getting to New Zealand. And then I want to tell you about being in New Zealand and getting COVID. So just give me a second to take a swig here. Yeah, so after all that's said and told, and I'm living in New Zealand, in Queenstown, I'm working for NZ Ski, big company for the tourism operator in New Zealand for snowboarding. I work on the mountain, or I work on the transport up and to and from the mountain, driving a shuttle bus, living in a share house with 3 awesome dudes. G'day Shlok, if you're watching. If anybody that watched my content, you guys saw him. Like we did a couple of live streams. Avi, Jay, even Timona, she was there sometimes. Just awesome dudes. Had a great time. Yeah, props to these guys. And if you ever need a accommodation in New Zealand, short term or long term, I'm sure Shlok has a room for you. Great guy. So I'm living with these Indian guys, and we're working. They're all working. I'm all working. Now, invariably, I'm dealing with a lot of different people on a daily basis, and the COVID requirements had lapsed or relaxed, let's say, over the course of whatever the last 8 months. So you didn't even need to wear a mask anymore. Of course, there were still signs up saying if you wanted to mask up, you can. And there's the hand, there's the antibacterial wipes and all that stuff in the buses. So everybody can do their thing what they want, but you don't have to do it. So I don't do it. I don't like wearing the mask. So I didn't wear a mask, and not many people did wear masks. It was kind of like, okay, finally, we don't have to, let's not. So I'm working, and of course, dealing with all these passengers every day, different people up on the mountain. There's COVID, right? COVID, it's happening, and you're probably going to get it and pass it on. Which is interesting, really, because just a sidestep, I remember when they found a single case of COVID anywhere, it would shut the premises down. It would close businesses. In fact, there were businesses in Sydney that went out of business, like literally bankrupt, because, what was the restaurant? There was a chain of duck restaurants, some duck Chinese restaurant or something. And the dishwasher who did a split shift at 2 different locations had tested positive, shut the restaurant down, out of business. Even in the local town here, when Woolworths had a case of COVID, they closed it for deep cleaning, whatever that meant, deep cleaning. They closed the whole supermarket, and at that point, there's close to 100 people without jobs because there are things closed because they got a deep clean because somebody tested positive and they were in there getting a packet of Smarties. You see what I'm saying? It just seemed a bit silly. So when it was known that there's definitely COVID up there on NZ Ski, and I worked at Coronet Peak, when there was COVID up there, I just thought it was interesting that they didn't do anything. There was no closure. There was no deep clean. There was nothing. It was just like, oh yeah. Well, if you feel like you're unwell, go and get a test. It's like, there's heaps of people up here with COVID, right? It's cold and snotty and the cold season and it's winter, and of course, and so invariably I got COVID without even. It's logical, right? I got it. I mean, I'm double jabbed, and I was testing every time I had to, but I still got COVID. Now, this is where I'm just saying this because it seemed like a comical response. So I told my boss. By the way, if you never had COVID, I'll tell you what happened with me. Extremely cold, like really cold. And I know I'm up there in the snow, so it's already cold. It's already freezing it's 0 degrees Celsius, minus 36 Fahrenheit, right, and less. And so I'm already in a cold environment. But there was one night where, so driving the shuttle bus off the mountain, we had to take staff members to and from town and back up. And there was one night where there was a barbecue, like beers and barbecue and like open fire pits, and it was for staff only. I can't remember what the specifics were, but it was like, yeah, I guess it got to like 9 p.m. and the only ones on the hill were staff and the drivers. And so my colleague and I were waiting for those staff members to have their barbecue and beers, and then I was going to drive a bunch of them back down the hill. And I'm up there around this fire pit, and I was frozen cold, like and shivering, like shaking cold. And then I'd turn my back to the fire, warm up that side. This side would go ice cold. So I knew that I was getting ill, and so I went home. Next day I woke up, felt rat shit. Went up the hill, right? Went up the hill, did my job, but then I told my boss and I said, I think I've got COVID. I've got the symptoms. I feel garbage. And he said, okay, go to HR at the building and get a rat test and immediately test. And so I did, and it tested positive. Now, this is where it's worth documenting, or it's the reason I'm doing this stream is because I think what happened next is ridiculous. My boss says to me, so you've tested positive. Okay, you need to go home and you need to isolate at home. Now, what I haven't told you, and I guess this is the point of doing this stream, is because I'm remembering this sort of a little bit backwards. I forgot to mention that my housemates also were testing positive. So of the three guys, Shloki had already had COVID. I think Avi had it and Jay hadn't had it. Avi and Shlok both tested positive. And so I was told that you probably picked it up from your... What the hell? Hold on a sec. Apologies for that. I just heard something strange behind me and I just got freaked out a little. I was mid remembering something too, and something just changed my thought. Anyway, so two of my housemates had it or tested positive. Prior to that, one of them had already had COVID, and I think this was Avi's first time, and Jay didn't test positive. So when I told the HR department that's what's happening, they said more than likely, fuck, I'm remembering it wrong. I didn't test on the mountain, I tested at home. So that's right. Oh, geez, I'm so glad I'm doing this stream, because this is why I want to do this. I want to get it out there so that I don't forget it, because I'm already forgetting. So what happened was I was working. I'd already felt rat shit that day before when we're up there doing the staff thing. I went home, went to bed, woke up, still felt shit, went to work. That's when Shlok sent me a message saying, hey man, I don't want to scare you, but I just tested positive. And so did Avi. And I was like, oh shit, that's right. So that's when I went to my boss and said, hey, my housemates just tested positive. What should I do? And he said, go to HR, get yourself a test kit and go home immediately. Now this is why I wanted to bring this up, because I thought the idea of going home to where the COVID was the stupidest thing possible, right? If the idea of keeping everybody apart and separating it, now I'm up there on the mountain, okay, I did feel shit. I'd already felt like I was getting something I'd never had before, right? The feeling that night of being that ice cold, it's not just being out in the snow. It was worse than that, right? Really strange feeling. So I already had something weird going on. Was it COVID? We didn't know. Here's the solution. I want you to go and stay with the people that definitely have COVID. So I want you to go and be in there, and therefore you are also going to get COVID, whether you like it or not. Now, I'm no scientist, but wouldn't the better thing to do be to separate me and say, how many housemates you got? 3? 2 of them tested positive, 1 didn't? Okay, you need to get away from there immediately, right? You need to isolate away from there. But no, the requirements from New Zealand law, and my boss wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just saying this is what the requirements are. You got to go and isolate at home. So I went back home and I told Shloke, I was like, hey man, I've got to stay home now for 2 weeks. And I haven't tested positive yet, but I got a kit here. I'm going to do the test. And then, of course, I tested positive. And get this. This will blow you away. This will absolutely blow you away. Shloke tested positive and Avi tested positive. Because Shloki had already had COVID, he didn't have to stay home. There was some weird loophole that it's like, oh, but if you've already had it, you don't have to isolate. But what? I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, I'm allowed to work. I'm allowed to do anything. Like, so you've got COVID. There's your test. I've got COVID. There's my test. Avi's got COVID. There's his test. Avi hasn't had it before. Neither have I. We have to stay here, and you can just go about your normal day. And he's like, yeah, because I've already done it once before. I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, how does this even work? That doesn't make, and he's like, that doesn't make any sense, but I'm not staying home. So anyway, what happened was 2 weeks of isolating in New Zealand. I just sat on the couch and watched every Netflix show that I think I pretty much drained the Netflix. There was none left. I drank all that flicks of net. And I'm pretty certain Timona, the other housemate, on and off housemate, I think she got a bit annoyed with me because I was quite literally on that couch for 2 weeks, just sitting there. And then get this. This is another thing that I'm remembering. There was this kind of sucks actually. There was a night planned for staff. So the transport division, who I worked for NZ Ski, they had a night where it was like to thank a mid-season sort of piss up kind of thing. We're all going to take you out for dinner and that. And this looks bad on NZ Ski. I sent out a message to my boss, and then I sent out DMs in a group chat. And then when I didn't get a response, I also did something else. But I'll tell you what I did was I said, hey, you guys are all having your transport division staff night. I've obviously got COVID, so I've got to isolate. Can someone take an order from me from the restaurant and bring a doggy bag to my door? You don't even have to you don't have to even come in. You can just drop it and then text me and say it's at the front. And I hit my boss up first, and he didn't respond. So then I hit up a DM, a chat DM with a bunch of crew that I was close with, and nobody really said anything about it. So then I posted on the Facebook staff NZ Ski Coronet Peak staff page explaining what the situation was, and nobody even made any effort to do that. So I'm like, I'm the one that's isolating here. I've got to stay home. You're all having happy times with your staff thing. Can't someone just bring me the food? Like, I want to enjoy the ribs or whatever it was, just, and nothing. So my housemates were pissed off at me because I was there for 2 weeks. The company wouldn't even bring me food. I'm like, fuck, this sucks. It's a big thing to come out to New Zealand and set up a life and work, and then all of a sudden you get this COVID thing, and then meanwhile Shloke's out there just doing his daily job with COVID, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right? But I will say this though, the laws in New Zealand were slightly different in the sense that I got paid pretty much my full wage, so it's kind of weird because you got paid by the hour, and the hours you worked, but the payment that the government gave me to stay home and watch Netflix was almost the same as my wages that I would have acquired by working. So I didn't really mind, couch hogging it for 2 weeks, except that my housemates got pretty annoyed. But that's just the nature of it. So all told, after that, I went back to work. And I guess I was then okay because I never tested. Do you know what? I never tested myself again. Even though, and I don't mind going on record here, even though there was a time when I felt not the same temperature change, like that cold shivering crap. It wasn't that. It was something slightly different. It was like I had like a real crunchy throat for a while. And I got to be honest, I didn't test and I didn't say anything. I kept it to myself. And I was like, in this instance, I feel like I'm only here for the winter, like the 3 months or 4 months or whatever the employment lasted, tail end of the 3 month beginning and then the end, and then a little bit extra on both sides, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, well, if I test and I'm positive, I've got to sit down for another 2 weeks. That's a total of a month that I might as well not come to New Zealand, right? So I didn't test. And then I thought, well, hold on a second. Upon reflection, when I was considering what I'd done, because I might have broken a law, I was like, but wait a second, even if you did test and you ticked it as if it came up with the 2 bars and you were positive again, then I would be in the same category as Schlock. And so I wouldn't have to isolate. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because there was that weird sort of loophole, whereas if you've already had it, you just don't have to isolate. So I was like, well, I have already had it. So I'm not even, so I was like, I don't even want to know. But even if I did know, I wouldn't have to isolate. So I was like, well, what am I doing wrong then by not, like, it's a mental thing. Like I felt guilty by not testing, but then I was like, but even if I did test and if I came up guilty, you can still go about your job. I guess the point of it would be then that you can tell someone, hey, I've got COVID. I've got the good COVID. I'm allowed to work. Happy times. Get in the bus and let's go snowboarding, you know? Like, yeah, it's just strange. So I think that's everything of that story that I needed to get out. I just wanted to sort of splurt that out and just have it on record, just because I feel like sometime in the future, like 5, 10 years, 20 years from now, when we look back on this, we will be using these kind of stories. They'll be like, really? Is that how you guys dealt with that shit back then in the 2020s? That seems a bit weird. Well, that's how I look at it anyway. There'll come a point when documentation will be required, and the documentation will come from anecdotal stories. And a guy telling you a story in a bar, it's not the same as a guy literally just saying it to stream, right? I'm just documenting it via this mechanism. Because like I said, as I was telling the story, even I was forgetting stuff, and it's been 2 years, and in 5 years, I'll probably forget the whole thing. So with that in mind, the chat's been very quiet. Thank you for that. In the chat, John C, hello, the internet. Smash the like button. Yeah, did we get any likes here? I got no likes. Can I get a trouser like? Let me refresh my trousers. Do I have no likes there? No, I see some likes. I see 2 likes, and I see 3 watching. Hey, thank you. That's a good number. 3 watching, 2 likes. David said, good morning. Good morning, everyone in the chat. Dugsky, good opening gifts. Thank you, man. John, for my COVID-19 story, there was a few times that my parents tested positive, but luckily I never did. I liked it already. Thank you, John. So look, I'll say this one more time. I don't have any other COVID stories. In the description of this stream, I've put a link to the first stream where you can go back and watch the story from that. That's also a pretty interesting tale. But what I want to do, and you know, my channel's not very big, so this probably won't work. But if anybody does want to do this again, if anybody has their versions of the stories, you've got to be willing to come on as a talking head. I'm not just going to have comments, and you know, I want you to be able to come out and tell the story. I want you to be able to tell it as accurately and as historically on point as you possibly can. And again, the reason for that is so that we can have it documented. Then later on, it can be considered some kind of learning tool. And yeah, even if you've done something wrong, like arguably I might have done something wrong by not telling anybody about the second time, but then the point of it was to document it and explain why. And I think I covered my bases there. So am I good? Am I innocent? So yeah, and if nobody doesn't have anything for that, we just won't do this again. This could wrap this concept of you're remembering your COVID stories if nobody has anything additional to add to the tales. I mean, I don't, so. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here. And if you didn't like the stream already and you're watching the VOD, please like this up, share this out, and that would be very handy for me and for anybody else. And enjoy yourselves. Keep COVID free, COVID safe. What? 2024.